this is Dr. Lewis-Goldstein. I want to tell you about your muslin that you're going to be preparing your samples with. We're going to be using this fabric all through the semester. So when you get your muslin, you want to realize that you have 5 yards of 63-inch muslin. Muslin is made on a loom. And there's 2 directions, as we've talked about before. There's the lengthwise direction, and this is where you have like 15 feet of muslin because you have 5 yards. Your warp yarns are the stronger yarns. They're the ones that don't stretch as much. They tend to be thinner in diameter, and there tends to be more warp yarns than there are weft yarns. But this direction is your lengthwise grain, so we always want to keep track of it. It's recognized by the selvage edge, and in your case, and in my case, the selvage edge has fringe on it. It's nice, even fringe, and this very edge has a firmly woven part that's about a ½ an inch wide. The other direction that you have is your widthwise. Your width direction is 63 inches, and so that's about 5 feet. I'm measuring this here so you can see the width direction. These are your weft yarns that go across. Remember, I said you can remember weft because weft goes weft and right. And as we measure across this direction, you can see that actually I've got almost 64 inches worth across my fabric. Here's my other selvage edge. You have a selvage edge on each side. A selvage edge on each side, one side, 2 sides, and then the crosswise direction, your weft yarns. Now remember that if your warp yarns are stronger, that means your weft yarns tend to be weaker. They tend to be more stretchy. They tend to be a little fatter in diameter, and they tend to have not as many yarns per inch when you compare them to your warp yarns. Now, we want grain perfect samples. So in order to prepare those grain perfect samples, we're not going to cut these out. We're going to tear. And what I had shared with you last time was that from this selvage edge, we're going to measure in about 1 inch and make a mark. And then we're going to snip that mark and tear. So let me show you where I've done this. Actually, on the other end, I made a mark about 1 inch in from the selvage edge. I snipped it and I tore it. Now the thing is our samples that we're preparing are 8 inches in the lengthwise direction. 8 inches here. So if I take my ruler and I go to the end and I go down to 8 inches and make a mark, I made a mark there. I also had made a mark, let me unfurl this. I had also made a mark and snipped it going the other direction. So I kind of have an L shape now. And I tore that. In fact, I could continue to tear that. And now I have something that's always going to be 8 inches long. So I know that that 8 inches is always going to be my warp direction. We know that it's grain perfect because I can take one yarn and pull it all the way out. Actually, there's several here. One yarn, pull it all the way out, But now I know that I need to get 4 inches across. So if I take my ruler and I measure off 4 inches, or I can take my sewing gauge and measure that, set that at 4 inches, because then I don't have to keep re-measuring. I always have 4 inches on my sewing gauge. And I can make a mark. And now I'm going to snip it. And now I'm going to tear it. And now I have a grain perfect sample. And I can keep going all the way down the side of my fabric. So the next thing you want to do with your sample is, well, we're going to want to press it eventually, but what we're going to want to do is make sure that when we fold it in half, because we're going to want to have a halfway spot, if we fold it in half, we want everything to match. And this one actually looks like it's coming out pretty well. I have one here that didn't fold quite as nicely. When I folded it in half, I found out that one side was a little shy. You can barely see it there, but it's a little shy. So just like your textbook talks about on page 56 and 57, when you want to straighten your yardage, you simply pull on the direction that you want to have more straight. So if I pull this, now when I fold it, hey, we're coming out pretty straight and things match. You always want to put your name down on the bottom, and at that halfway mark, you always want to make a directional lengthwise grain symbol. That's a double-ended arrow. This indicates that this is the lengthwise grain and your perpendicular is your crosswise grain. So we always know that. I've pressed these samples, which they look a lot better. You can see that when you tear them, sometimes they kind of curl, and that's okay. Just press them down straight. All of your samples are going to be fuzzy and that out along the edge, and that's perfectly fine. That's how we know they're grain perfect. Now, on the first thing that we're going to prepare, what I did, and you're going to want 2 samples put together, but the top one, we fold it in half, make our grain line, make sure your name's on the bottom, and for this, from that halfway mark, we're going to want to have 3 lines above and 3 lines below. So from that halfway mark, I put, and there's strings all over, that's just kind of the way it is when you're tearing fabric. But it's a good way to know about where the grain is. From this halfway mark, if I put my ruler at that halfway mark and have one edge above and I have it at the center of your 2 inch. So 1 inch is above, 1 inch is below. It's easy for me to then simply make a line going across. If I measure from that halfway mark, I can take a pencil and simply draw a line. Now if I have that one line there, because I know I want 3 lines above, oops, I can simply line up my ruler with the 1/2 inch line, draw the line above, then line up my ruler with a 1/2 inch below there, draw the line, and I have my 3 lines. Now the top line you want to mark off in 1/4 inch marks. On your ruler, the heavy lines indicate 1 inch. The lighter line equals a 1/2 inch. And in between there is a 1/4 inch. And so you can take your ruler and mark a 1/4 inch. But I also want you to get used to using your gauge. So your gauge has a 1/4 inch marking here. And you should be able to check this with your gauge, or mark off with your gauge 1/4 inch. On the uneven basting side, on the bottom, we're going to be marking off 1 inch lines. And so the 1 inch line is here. And then 1/4 inch, which is there. And so you have close-up pictures of that on the PowerPoint. You need to prepare several of these. Actually, we're going to be using these for our machine stitching as well as the hand stitching. So go ahead, and I've gotten so far 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of the part that I've ripped so far. And you can see that I still have fabric left. I'm going to continue to rip, to mark, to snip, to tear again, and create my samples, prepare my samples. So that's how you go about preparing your samples in a little bit more depth compared to what I showed you in the PowerPoint.